All right. So we're getting back to the crucifixion story. We're taking our time to get through it. And just to bring us quickly into context, we're understanding the crucifixion under the context of the New Testament and what the Bible means when it says the New Testament, and that Jesus is the mediator of the New Testament and the actual testator. It's his will and testament, and his death is necessary for this new plan to receive the promise of inheritance that God wants to bless his people with. But the First Testament wasn't capable of really providing that. Jesus' death is necessary for the institution of the New Testament as a channel and avenue by which God can give the blessing and deliverance and forgiveness and salvation that he wants to give. And so a quick summary of events and the sequence here to have this knowledge. The Last Supper took place. Jesus and his disciples came to Jerusalem. They are not residents of Jerusalem, but they travel there for the Passover event. They have the Last Supper, part of the Passover rituals and observance, just like a lot of us are getting ready to have a supper in about 6 days from now as a annual observance. They had a particular supper that night in connection with the Passover observance, and we looked closely at that last week. From there, and you can see that was in this upper room, possibly this kind of location here. There's actually a specific building in Jerusalem that is suspected to be possibly be the building where this took place. Nobody knows that for sure, but it's kind of interesting. It could be right there where that circle is. After the supper, they went out of the city to a place called the Garden of Gethsemane, or also called the Mount of Olives, where they oftentimes, when they visited Jerusalem, they spent time out there praying and communing with the Lord. So they went out there for prayer, and from there, the soldiers took Jesus from his prayer place to the high priest Caiaphas for almost like a grand jury proceedings to put together a case against him could then be taken to the governor. In the process of this, Judas came to a kind of a regret of what he had done, and rather than turn to the Lord for mercy, he ended up taking his own life. The priest and the religious leaders took Jesus to the governor, Pilate, for a legal trial, and he was sentenced to death and then crucified outside the city. So for some context of what we're going to see today, let's think back. Let's go back in time a little bit to a couple of the teachings that the disciples had been hearing from Jesus, like the Lord's Prayer. He said, when ye pray, say, Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, as in heaven, so in earth. Now, he taught them this prayer quite some time prior to this. And what we're going to realize is that all these teachings, even though these men got the inside scoop, they got the explanations that other people didn't get, even they really didn't get it, you know. And in growing in the Lord, though, we find that over time, we can come into deeper and deeper understanding of things, even that God has already told us and already showed us, things we have learned. Next year, we may learn the same thing, even better and even deeper. And this concept here with the Lord's Prayer, they,
more recommended
just
for
a
you.
second here. Let me see if I can take care of that. There we go. Oh, sorry. There we go. So, yeah, we learn things more. We may have some level of revelation and insight and understanding, but there's more. And so, yeah, they learned this. They learned how to pray, but did they really understand what it means to pray, thy will be done? I don't think they did. I don't think they understood what it really means for your own will to be surrendered to the will of God. I don't know if I fully understand it, but I know I understand it better than I once did. And it's something that I reach for and strive for because the Bible shows me how important a key that it is to surrender your will to the will of God. And it's a lot easier said than done. Another teaching that they heard Jesus all the way back near the beginning of his ministry in the Sermon on the Mount. He said, I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. They heard these teachings. He went from place to place teaching these same concepts. These guys traveled with him, heard these teachings over and over again. They knew these are the principles that Jesus teaches, but they hadn't really seen it in action the way they're about to see it. And let's even go back to a specific scene and look particularly at Peter, because through the process of this story, we're going to see Peter in particular kind of singled out here and there. So let's back up for context to an interaction that Peter had with Jesus in Matthew chapter 16. It says, Simon Peter answered and said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God, the Messiah, the Christ, the promised one, prophesied from centuries upon centuries, waited for, anticipated by these Jewish people who were under bondage and under dominion of the Roman Empire and had previously been under the Persian Empire, and prior to that, the Babylonian Empire. And they're sick of it. And they've got this promise of a savior, a deliverer, a Christ, a Messiah coming to redeem Israel and put them back on top. But they don't understand what it means. But he did understand who Jesus was. He understood that Jesus was that Messiah and that manifestation that was like no other ever, not a prophet, not a man like any other man, but the promised and sent one, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said, blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah. That's his actual name is Simon, right? Which is the Old Testament says Simeon. It's the same name. But he said, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. So that's an important thing to understand, is that there's only so much that we can figure out naturally. There's only so much that we can get our head around through normal mental processes. But there comes a point that to go farther in understanding God, God himself must reveal it. We could use the word revelation, revealing, revelation. And I pray for revelation. I want God to reveal more and more to me. I want to see things that I can't see just with natural means, natural thinking. And what's amazing is when you receive revelation, when God reveals truths to you, even there are things the Bible calls mysteries. And mysteries are things that the natural mind cannot understand, or to use a Bible word, Bible calls it the carnal mind. You cannot understand spiritual mysteries. That doesn't mean they can never be understood, but God must reveal to you. You have to have spiritual revelation in order to understand mysteries. Well, once you receive revelation, the understanding fits logic. You can't come to it strictly by logic, or even if you follow the logic, you don't get a hold of the conclusion truly unless God reveals it to you. And we thankfully serve a God who loves us and who is merciful and who wants us to know and understand him. So he does and will reveal things to us. We've looked at the scripture before that says the Spirit of truth will lead you into all truth. So the key is to follow that Spirit of truth for the one step he's leading me or you in right now. And if I'll follow the Spirit of truth and accept what God is showing me and revealing to me that matches up to scripture, then he'll lead me farther and I'll get deeper understanding, deeper revelation, and understand more and more, all of which once revealed will clearly match scripture and will clearly fit logic. But I only can really see it if God reveals it to me. And so Jesus said, Simon, you've got a very important revelation right here. And in fact, this is how important it is. I'm going to change your name right now. I'm putting a name on you that I want you to be known by instead of Simeon. Simeon's a good name. It was named after one of the patriarchs of Israel, one of the 12 tribes. But he said, no, I'm putting a new name on you, and it's the name Peter, which means a rock. And then he said, because it's on this rock. Now, there's sometimes people mistakenly think that this is the same word, rock, and it's not. The word for Peter refers to like a chip off of a giant rock. But the rock, next word rock, is the giant rock, the rock of Gibraltar. He said upon this rock, so he's not saying on you, but on the revelation that you have. That's the foundational truth. I will build my church on that. And I'm naming you Peter because you're going to be associated with that foundational truth. And I want you to always remember that this is the foundational truth. And Peter, you are going to carry responsibility and you are going to do important things for me. And so it's critical that you hang on to this revelation that you have. So I'm going to build my church on the understanding of who I am. And the gates of hell shall not prevail against the church. And I'm going to give you, Peter, the keys of the kingdom of heaven, that whatsoever you shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever you shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. He's putting confidence in Peter that Peter is going to actually respond to the prompting of the Spirit and is going to bind and loose on earth those things that the Lord is directing him to. And it's going to parallel and match up to the spiritual dimension. So in other words, the things that Peter will speak out, those are binding truths, because Jesus is having confidence that when the time comes, Peter is going to speak what the Lord puts in his heart and mouth to speak. And those are going to be binding truths. He's going to be the lead executor of the New Testament to be implemented after the death of Jesus. Pretty honorable, pretty cool. And everybody calls him Peter after this. And it's a nickname in a sense, but it's a name of honor. Now watch what happens. Verse 20 said, then charged he his disciples that they should tell no man that he was Jesus the Christ. So, we've talked about the fact that the years of Jesus's ministry on earth, that the point of that was not to fully reveal, but it was to prepare. And this is one other indication. He's like, I don't even want you to tell anybody who I was. I want to walk around here for the next 3 years and do miracles and hint at things and whet people's appetite and pique people's curiosities so that after my death, you can then openly proclaim the truths. But we're not going to do that right now. The years of his ministry were preparation. But now But to them privately from that time, verse 21, from that time forth began Jesus to show unto his disciples how that he must go unto Jerusalem and suffer many things of the elders and chief priests and scribes, which, by the way, the elders and chief priests and scribes theoretically should be tied into the desire of the nation of Israel for God's blessing and God's, they're looking for and anticipating and expecting God to send a Messiah and a deliverer to defeat the Roman government and to restore their power on earth, because that's how it was always done previously. Throughout the book of Judges and the times of the kings, they would come under oppression. God would send a deliverer, and then in war, they would defeat the enemy and get placed on a high seat of power again as a nation, politically and in international relations, through fighting, through war. That's what they're expecting the Messiah to do, because that's what's always been done. So the elders and chief priests and scribes, theoretically, these are the religious leaders and should be linked up with that. But there have often been issues with that where they're not totally synced in because of the power that they have, which appeals to the flesh. Power appeals to the flesh. And these religious leaders were linked up to the Roman government, and they had close ties there, and part of their power relied on them. The Roman government, Herod as the king set up over that region a couple of decades before, had seen to it that they had a brand new temple rebuilt, and it was a very impressive thing. And so they don't feel like they can bite the hand that feeds them. You understand? And so they're not really looking to have a rebellion. They're looking to maintain their position of power, which they're actually drawing from the Roman government rather than from the Lord. And they're not even following Old Testament policy, because the high priest office, the office of the high priest, according to Old Testament law, is supposed to be passed down to firstborn, starting with Aaron, and then passed down to firstborns. But what we have going on, when you read the New Testament, you'll see there are two different individuals who get called high priest. One is a man named Annas, and the other is a man named Caiaphas. Annas is the father-in-law of Caiaphas. So how is Caiaphas qualified to be a high priest? According to Old Testament law, he's not. So they're just doing kind of whatever, and they're getting their stamps of approval from the Roman government. They're more in league with them than they are with looking for a deliverer from God. And I don't really even know what Annas's qualifications were. I don't know if he was descendant, firstborn from Aaron or not. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. But they kind of, it seems they sort of held the high priest authority almost somewhat together. Like Caiaphas may have been technically labeled high priest, but sometimes Annas was actually called high priest because he's his father-in-law, and you know, they can also use that authority and boss things around or whatever. In any case, I'm sidetracking. It all connects to where we're going, but let me get back to verse 21 here. It says, from that time forth began Jesus to show unto his disciples how that he must go unto Jerusalem and suffer many things of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and be raised again the third day. So he's been telling them exactly what's going to happen. But it still doesn't compute. They can't accept it. He's telling them, look, I'm going to be killed. We're going to go there. I'm going to be killed. It's not registering. And I assume and expect that even the context that in their imagination of what he's telling them is that there's going to be a battle and that Jesus is going to be a leader in that battle. Let me tell you something. People think of Jesus as some kind of soft personality and, just timid, tender, whatever. He could treat people with tenderness, but Jesus was incredibly strong. And we're going to see some of that in these passages that we'll look at in this story. And so these men felt like, yeah, this can be the guy that can do this. And he can lead an insurrection. And God can use him to give deliverance and to restore us to our rightful place in the world. Well, look what happened when he tells them, no, I'm going to be killed. It's not going to come out that way. I'm going to be killed. Peter took him, grabs him, and began to rebuke Jesus, saying, be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be unto thee. Can you imagine? He's arguing and saying, no, you're wrong. No, that's not the way it's going to happen. You're going to be the victorious one. They're going to be the ones that get killed. And so he tells Jesus this, and literally with an attitude of grabbing him and rebuking him. Keep in mind, this is happening right in the shadows of this other conversation where Peter said, yeah, I understand who you are. And Jesus said, I'm calling you Peter. This is critical. This is important. I'm giving you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And now Peter's like, hey, I've got the keys to the kingdom of heaven. So I'm going to loose something right now. I'm going to bind something right now. But he said, be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be unto thee. And isn't that interesting? He uses the word Lord, which means you're the master, you're the boss. I'm going to call you Lord, but I'm going to tell you what to do. And how many times have we done that, you guys? How many times do we call him Lord, but not do what he says to do? So he's saying, be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be unto thee. And verse 23, but Jesus turned and said unto Peter, the same guy he just said, I'm going to give you keys to the kingdom of heaven. Now he says, get thee behind me, Satan. Thou art an offense unto me. Why? For thou savorest not the things that be of God, but those things that be of men. So he's like, I understand what's going on in your mind right now, Peter. I understand what you want to do and what you want to happen. I understand that you want to go fight for your rights and fight for your place. I know that. That's natural. That's the things that are of men. That's the flesh. That's the way people are. People strive, people fight, people contend. We promote ourselves. Said, but the things that are of God are contrary to that. And you're embracing your natural side rather than embracing the things that I'm trying to tell you, because they're going contrary to your nature, and you have not surrendered your will to me. He said, get thee behind me, Satan, which, by the way, is the exact same phrase that he said to Satan himself when Satan tempted him after fasting 40 days. He said, get thee behind me, Satan. Now he says that to Peter, get thee behind me, Satan. In other words, your thinking right now, your mind right now, you've got the exact same mind as the devil. And said, these are the things that be of men. You've got the same mind as the world. You've got the same mind as people who are not walking with God and living for God at all. Even though you actually are, Peter, but you got to get better. You got to grow more. You've got to surrender more. You've got to turn more over to me. So verse 24, Then said Jesus unto his disciples, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. See, Jesus knew exactly what was going to happen. He knew now that he was going to be carrying his own cross up to the crucifixion. And he said, so if you want to follow me, you got to do what I'm going to do. I'm going to be doing this in part to set an example for you. So if you want to come after me, you're not going to get what you want. You're going to have to give up on what you want so that you can receive what God wants to give you, which will be so much better than the things that you want. And verse 25, for whosoever will save his life shall lose it. But wait, isn't that the most fundamental instinct of a human, to save your own life? I mean, that's the core of who we are. We want to save our lives. But Jesus is saying all the way down to that very core, you have to surrender to me. You have to surrender to God. Because if you respond to that instinct when God is calling you to do something, if you strive to protect and to save yourself and to save your life, you're going to lose it. You're going to get nowhere. You're going to get the fruit of your own choices, which is not going to be what you expect it to be. It's not going to be pleasant. It's not going to be fulfilling. It's not going to be good for you or for those around you. If you save your life, you're going to lose it. But if you will lose your life for my sake, you'll find your life, because I'm going to give you life. The Bible said I'm come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly. So this is a tough lesson. Tough lesson. And they did not get it. This is back before. They have not gone to Jerusalem. He's telling them what is going to happen. And Peter says, no. And he said, look, you guys, this is what you need to understand. And they're like, that's not computing. I think I'll just sort of put that on a back burner and go on with life. And I don't know about all that. But after it's all said and done, that revelation came. And scooting forward, we go to the Apostle Paul, writing in the book of 1 Corinthians. And he had the revelation. He had the transformation from the Lord. And he says in 1 Corinthians 15, I protest by your rejoicing, which I have in Christ Jesus our Lord, I die daily. That's a unique way to characterize your walk with God. His prayer life. He's saying, this is what my prayer life is about. I die every single day. I die every single day. I get alone with the Lord and I crucify my fleshly nature. Every single day, I surrender my will to God. I die daily. I take up that cross and I follow Jesus, because you cannot follow Jesus while striving to save your own life and preserve your own will and priorities. So after the Last Supper was over, and in the Last Supper, let me just mention, I'm not pulling scriptures up on this, but during the Last Supper, Jesus told them, there's one of you right now who's here right now that's going to betray me. And keep in mind, understand what these people are anticipating a Messiah to do. Even though he's told them different, they don't get it. They've come to Jerusalem and they're like, things are culminating. There's such a buzz around Jesus now after he's gotten more and more famous and having a bigger and bigger impact over the last 3 years. And when they came into Jerusalem, he came in on a donkey, which sounds crude to us, or sounds, low rent to us, but there are fine donkeys that, if you go back, that there's the royal, it's not like, oh, it's just a dumb donkey or whatever. He came in as a king, and he was celebrated as a king when he came in. And they're like, yeah, here we go. The time is probably coming. This is probably the event. And then he's telling them, somebody's going to betray me. And they said, well, who is it? Which one is it? And in particular, the Bible points out Peter particularly persisted in trying to find out, who is it? Now, the Bible doesn't say this part that's in my mind. I kind of figure Peter, as brash and as bold as he was, and some of the things we're going to see him do, I think he's wanting to know which one of these guys is going to turn on you, because I'm ready. I'm ready for this insurrection, and whoever the turncoat is, he's going to pay. I think Peter wants to know who it is, because Peter wants to do something about it. But it's the will of God that this happened. Jesus could do something about it, but it's supposed to happen. For the person doing it, it's not good for him to do it. It's wrong. And yet it's the will of God that it happens. So Jesus does not prevent it. Peter wants to prevent it, I believe. Well, after the Last Supper, they proceed out of the city and go around to the Garden of Gethsemane, where they'd been many times and spent time in prayer. And when they get there, Jesus said, every single one of y'all is going to be offended by me tonight. And, they're all the things he's been saying, they're like, this is a big night. This is the stuff right here. And they've actually got swords with them. Not all of them, but some of them have swords that they've carried out there with them. And he said, every one of y'all is going to be offended tonight. And Peter's like, not me. I'm not going to be offended. I came here ready. I understand there's going to be trouble tonight, but I'm ready for it. And Jesus said, oh yeah, you? He said, you're going to deny me, straight up deny me 3 times before the cock crows in the morning, the 6 a.m. alarm clock sounds. You're going to have denied me 3 times. And Peter's like, no, He hasn't learned his lesson. You don't contradict the Lord. But he said, no, that's not going to happen. And here's what he said. He said, I'm ready to die with you. If I might die with you tonight, but I'm not going to deny you. He's ready to die. Okay. I really believe that. Sometimes we look at that and say, oh, he didn't know what he's talking about. He wasn't ready to die. No, he was. I absolutely believe he was ready to die, but he was ready to die fighting. He was prepared to go into a fight in jeopardy of his life, but he was not prepared to die surrendering. And that's what Jesus is requiring here. That's what he ran away from. Not just the prospect of dying, but the prospect of dying without fighting. He wanted to fight. So Luke 22 says, and he came out and went as he was wont, or as he tended to do, to the Mount of Olives. And his disciples also followed him. And when he was at the place, he said unto them, pray ye that ye enter not into temptation. And he was withdrawn from them about a stone's cast, and he kneeled down and prayed, saying, Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, and that's on your handout, of fill in the blank, not my will, but thine be done. He taught them to pray. And he said, pray, thy will be done. Now he's demonstrating what that really means. You can't pray, thy will be done, without also praying, not my will. They can't both happen. Your will and God's will cannot both happen. So if you're going to pray, thy will be done, you are praying, my will not be done. So you might as well articulate that specifically, as Jesus did here. And Jesus made his desire known, made his request known, and that's fine. That's good to do. You should tell God what you want, but then you also release it to God and say, this is what I want. This is what I'm asking for, but you know better than I do. And if this is not your will to do it, please don't let me have it. Don't let me push through and make this happen if it's not what you want to do. I'm asking for your will. Sorry, I had a little technical glitch there. So nevertheless, not my will, but thine. Hey, I don't know when I disappeared. I'm assuming, was it only a couple seconds?
It was just a short time, Christian.
Okay, awesome.
Not very long.
All righty. Yeah, so we're saying Jesus is praying, not my will, but thine be done. Now, I do want to point something out also. What we're dealing with here is the flesh versus the spirit. And that's the struggle that we all continue to fight, the flesh versus the spirit. It would not make any sense to think of this prayer as separate persons of God, which we've already looked at the fact that that's not even a biblical concept anyway, but it is kind of a popular concept that, oh yeah, well, God the Son prayed to God the Father. But if you did think of God that way, then what this is saying then is that God the Son actually has a different will than God the Father. Not only a different will, but a will that is in opposition. And the concept that doesn't compute, that doesn't add up. So it can't be deity versus deity. We find ourselves, entertaining almost like a Roman mythology kind of thing, deity versus deity, but one is going to surrender to the other or whatever. No. God's will is his will. He doesn't have opposing wills and battling his own self inside himself. What we're dealing with here, the Son is the flesh and the Father is the spirit. So we're dealing with the will of the flesh versus the will of the spirit. And we're dealing with that miraculous situation that Jesus, even though he was God internally, God manifest in the flesh, he experienced living as flesh the same as you and I. And that's a miracle that can't be understood without revelations, why 1 Timothy 3:16 calls it a mystery. The mystery of godliness, that God was manifest in the flesh. How is that possible that he could experience being a man while also being God? And the flesh side can pray to the spirit side, and the flesh side has a will of its own that, because it's flesh, is in opposition to the will of God and the will of the spirit. And he had to pray that will into subjection, which he did. And that's what we have to do. This is the example to us. Now, when he's praying this, verse 43 said, there appeared an angel unto him from heaven, strengthening him, and being in an agony. And this, picture this prayer. We're not talking about just like a calm little prayer. Being in an agony, he prayed more earnestly. He's praying hard. It's a strenuous effort. Prayer is that way sometimes. It's a strenuous effort. It says his sweat was, as it were, great drops of blood falling down to the ground. Now, this says it was, as it were, great drops of blood. So there's two possibilities of what it's describing here. No doubt he's working. This is a prayer that he is laboring. He is straining himself mentally, emotionally, and physically. And one possibility is that it's straight up sweat, but it's just bigger drops and thicker, than what we normally sweat, just because of, I don't know all the physiology. But there actually is a phenomenon that you may have heard of, that it's a rare thing that happens. And when it happens, it's under unusual stress, like more stress than most of us ever experience. there have been situations where blood comes out through the pores of the skin like sweat would, and people bleed through their skin when they're under such momentous pressure and stress emotionally and mentally. It's very possible that that's actually what happened to Jesus while he was in prayer. Now it says, as it were, great drops of blood. So I'm not 100% sure whether that's what happened or not. I tend to think that that probably is what happened, but it doesn't absolutely say it. One thing that's interesting about that phenomenon, once that takes place to a person, that person's skin is hypersensitive after that point. So anything that touches them and hits them is going to tend to hurt. And they're just hypersensitive to pain after going through that. Well, we already know the story. Jesus is on his way to being beaten and whipped and hit and ultimately crucified. And it's very possible that in this prayer, his body prepared itself to experience pain from that even more than normal. Now, but what's interesting to realize is that the crucifixion kind of happened in two stages. It ends up with the actual crucifying of that fleshly body. But what's more significant than that in a way is crucifying the will. Because the body could be crucified against its will, you know. But in this prayer, Jesus wrestled his own will and crucified himself. Once the will was completely subdued and submitted and subjected, then the rest could happen. But let's move on. Verse 45 said, when he rose up from prayer and was come to his disciples, he found them sleeping for sorrow, and said unto them, why sleep ye? Rise and pray, lest ye enter into temptation. Said, don't give in to your fleshly desires. And I wanted to point out a different gospel account of the same thing. Mark 14 says it this way, said, he cometh and findeth them sleeping, and saith unto Peter, said, aren't you the guy who said you're ready to die for me? And I've been praying my guts out for about an hour, and you're taking a nap? Okay, can you see that maybe you're not as committed as you think you are? And this is interesting too. When he talks to Peter right now, he doesn't call him Peter, he called him Simon. He said, Simon, sleepest thou? Couldst not thou watch 1 hour? He said, watch ye and pray, lest ye enter into temptation. The spirit truly is ready, but the flesh is weak. He said, yes, what you've been saying is partly true, but you're dealing with more flesh than you think you are. And the flesh is more of an obstacle for you than you think it is. You need to pray to get that flesh under subjection so that God can do with you the things that he's already put in your heart and mind and shown you what can be and what he wants to do. But you still got to overcome the flesh for it to really come to pass. And this process, depending on which account you read, you get more details or less details about different things. But this thing of going off and praying and then coming back and saying, hey, you guys are sleeping, couldn't you watch 1 hour? That happened 3 times. So as near as I can gather, it appears that this prayer session of Jesus's was about 3 hours long. And that an hour at a time, he came back and checked in with his disciples. And it took 3 of those 1 hour sessions for the will of the flesh to actually be brought under subjection. So when that was over, verse 47 of Luke 22 says, while he yet spake, behold, a multitude, and he that was called Judas, one of the 12, went before them and drew near unto Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said unto him, Judas, betrayest thou the Son of Man with a kiss? Now let's look at John, same story. I just want to see how John tells it. It says here, Judas then, having received a band of men and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, cometh thither with lanterns and torches and weapons. So he's leading them because they don't know where to go. But this is a bunch of soldiers from the priest's authority. Verse 4, Jesus, therefore, knowing all things that should come upon him, went forth and said unto them, whom seek ye? Now he's being facetious here. He's being rhetorical. He knows who they're seeking. He knows exactly what's going on. And this is what I'm saying. Look how strong this guy is. And the strength right now, in part, comes from the surrender that he just went through. When you know you're in the will of God, you can step and speak with a level of boldness that you cannot have when you, in your core, are not surrendered to God. But when you're surrendered to God and you're stepping in the will of God and you know it, there's a boldness that you can operate in. So he just steps up to them. He doesn't wait for them to come to him. He says he went forth and he said, hey, who are you looking for? They answered him, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus saith unto him, I am he. And Judas also, which betrayed him, stood with them. Now, we've talked about this before. This is a grammar thing, right? That translate from one language to another. Sometimes you kind of add a word here and there or rearrange to make clear the way people's ears for a certain language expect to hear things. He didn't actually say a word for the word he. He actually just said, I am, which grammatically for them basically said, yeah, I'm the one, right? But the words he spoke were simply, I am. I say words, it's one word that means I am. And that's in verse 6. And as soon as he had said unto them, I am, they went backward and fell to the ground. We've talked about this before. I am is the first name that God identified himself by with Moses at the burning bush. And Moses said, well, who are you? What should I call you? And he said, I am that I am. So when you go and you tell them who sent you, just tell them the I am sent you. The self-existent one, the one who is whatever he is, and you can't do anything about it. You can't contain it. You can't fully understand it and describe it. He just is what he is. He's God. He's all powerful. He's eternal. He's omnipresent. He's omniscient. He encompasses everything. He made everything. He's the I am. And Jesus was that I am in a body, in the flesh, the manifestation of God, the image of God. And they said, we're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. And he said, I am. And the power of God impacted the physical to where these big, tough, armored soldiers just fell backwards to the ground. I know we've talked about it before, but I just love that event. I love that scene. So now they're all on the ground. And rather than run away, he says again, now he's looking down at them on the ground, said, whom seek ye? Said, didn't I just ask you? And I just told you. And they said, as they're dusting themselves off and getting up off the ground, they said, well, we're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus said, I've told you that I am he. If therefore you seek me, let these go. You're looking for me. So, okay, fine. You got me. No problem. Yeah, I could have left. I mean, I knocked all of you down just by talking. Your staves and clubs and bats and swords, these are not scaring me right now, y'all. I have no problem here, but I'm willing to go with you because I've surrendered my will to the will of God. So, but let's let these go. You don't need to take any of the rest of these prisoner. And if you think about it, if he's regarded as a criminal, it would make sense in a way legally to say, well, we need to round all these guys up. And even for what the high priests and them are trying to do, well, these guys are part of the influence that they want to stamp out, right? So it would actually make sense that they would round them all up and arrest them all and try, maybe not have them all crucified, but at least have them imprisoned or whatever. But Jesus is saying, no, we're not going to do that. So let these go. Well, why would they even let him go? I actually think they were scared to death of him right now. And whatever he said, basically, oh, okay, yeah, all right. But verse 9 says that the saying might be fulfilled, which he spake, of them thou gavest me, have I lost none. Let's go back to Luke to resume the story as Luke is telling it. Verse 49 said, when they which were about him, with Jesus, saw what would follow. Now, well, what do you think they saw? What would follow? What do you think they think is about to happen? It's time. They came to us with swords, and you just knocked them down with your words. I'm ready. Let's do this. Let's mix it up. And so they said, Lord, shall we smite with the sword? Are we ready to go? We're going to have this fight now? And in fact, let's hop over to John 18. It says that Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and smote the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. And John actually tells that the servant's name was Malchus. We're going to find out later that John actually had connections in the high priest's inner circle. And so he knows this guy. It's a servant of the high priest. It's like, one of his advisors, one of his top people. He's a deputy, an authority in the high priest government. But John knows him. But Peter takes his sword out and cut off his right ear. Now, Peter's not a soldier. Peter's not a knight in shining armor. Peter is a fisherman turned minister. I don't know what kind of sword training he even has at all, or sword experience he even has at all, but not a ton. So do you think that Peter has the skill to say, I'm going to cut off that guy's ear? No way. He cut off the right ear because he was trying to cut off his head. I figure Peter is swinging like this, one way or the other, and the high priest servant ducked over sideways as the sword is coming at his neck and ends up with his ear cut off rather than his head cut off. I don't know if it happened exactly that way, but somehow or another, I do not believe Simon Peter was trying to do anything other than kill this man. But he got his ear cut off. And then Jesus said to Peter, put up thy sword into the sheath. The cup which my Father hath given me, shall I not drink it? What do you want me to do? Have a fight right now? That's not what God has for me to do. So back to Luke, verse 50 said, one of them. Luke just said one of them, but John let us know that it was actually Peter. One of them smote the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. And look what Jesus did. Jesus answered and said, let's let it go. Suffer means allow. Allow this stuff. Let it happen. Don't resist it. Don't fight against it. Suffer ye thus far. And then what did he do? He touched his ear and he healed him. The will of the flesh is to destroy. The will of the spirit is to restore. Peter thinks he knows what the will of God is, but he's actually listening to his flesh. He savors the things that be of men and not of God. And he's striving and fighting, and Jesus actually heals him. I mean, you talk about do good to them that hate you and pray for them that despitefully use you. They heard Jesus teach that, but I don't think they envisioned it looking like this. These people are here to take Jesus away and have him crucified. And not only is Jesus saying, yeah, don't kill him, it's like, I'm going to actually heal this man. He didn't have to do that. That's how God operates. And then they took him and they led him and they brought him into the high priest's house, and Peter followed afar off. So that's going to lead us to the next stage of this story. And it's 12 o'clock. So we will leave it off here and pick up with the trial at Caiaphas palace next week. Well, I don't know if we're going to meet next week or not, but anyway.
We'll be having the leftovers.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Awesome, awesome. Now, next week, I think we should probably give everybody their holiday.
Sounds good.
And I know I'll be out in the middle of the Gulf on Friday.
Nice.
Yeah, we're going to go do some camping from Thanksgiving through the weekend out there.
Nice.
What we call our father-son trip, which would be a ton of us out there.
Very cool.
But Christian, you know, you always have a way of taking the word and make you hungrier for the word and actually want to pray. And, you know, the things that you were bringing out about bringing the flesh under subjection, we're never going to get fully there.
Right.
So it's always a
Constant
battle.
Mhm.
And so we should all have a stronger desire to pray and, you know, have ourselves fully submitted. Fully is the key. They're never going to be fully, but we're surrendered
We're
and
striving.
let God operate in us the way he wants to. You make me hungry for more of God, that's for sure.
Me too.
Anyone else got a thought or comment?
There's the righteousness. There shall be